Dejé a mi esposo para ir a cuidar a mi ex que estaba pasando por una enfermedad terminal. 3 años después él pasó a la otra vida, volví a casa de mi esposo, pero ya no quiere aceptarme solo porque quedé embarazada de mi ex. I have always walked through this life with a deep understanding that true character is forged in the fires of sacrifice and the weight of the crosses we choose to bear. For 7 years my marriage to Mark was a quiet, comfortable sanctuary, but I often felt that my soul was meant for a much higher calling than mere domestic stability. I wasn't just looking for a husband, I was looking for a way to prove that my capacity for grace exceeded the petty boundaries of ordinary people. When the phone rang and I learned that Julian, a man I once loved deeply, was facing a terminal diagnosis, with no one by his side, I knew my moment of testing had arrived. I didn't see an ex-boyfriend in that hospital bed. I saw a lost, suffering soul who needed a shepherd to guide him through the valley of the shadow of death. Mark, unfortunately, has always been a man of the earth, tethered to the small-minded concepts of propriety and exclusivity. When I told him that I needed to move in with Julian to provide the spiritual and physical care he lacked, Mark reacted with a shocking level of possessiveness. He had the audacity to call my mission disrespectful to our vows, failing to see that true love is inherently selfless and knows no borders. I tried to explain that by saving Julian's dignity, I was actually honoring the spirit of our own marriage, but he just stared at me with a cold, uncomprehending gaze. It became clear that I would have to carry this burden alone, so I packed a single suitcase and my Bible, preparing to offer myself as a living sacrifice. I walked out of our home, not as a woman leaving her husband, but as a missionary embarking on a journey of pure, unadulterated mercy. For 3 long years I dedicated every waking hour to being Julian's hands, his feet, and the very breath of peace in his lungs. I watched my own youth and the best years of my marriage wither away at the altar of compassion, never once complaining about the exhaustion or the isolation. While other women were going to brunches or buying shoes, I was cleaning bedpans and reading scripture to a man who was slowly fading into the great beyond. It was a grueling, holy work that required a strength I honestly don't think a man like Mark could ever begin to fathom. As Julian's time grew short, he wanted to leave me with a final living testament of the light we had shared during those dark months of his transition. When I discovered I was pregnant, I didn't see it as a complication or a mistake. I saw little Leo as a miracle of the transition, a spark of life born from the very edge of death. It was as if the universe itself was rewarding my devotion by giving me a piece of Julian to carry forward into the world. I truly believed that once the mission was over, Mark would see the transformation in me and be humbled by the sheer magnitude of my strength. I expected him to open his arms and welcome us both back, recognizing that I had returned a more evolved, more sanctified version of the woman he married. When Julian finally passed away and I returned to our front door, I was prepared to forgive Mark for his past, lack of support, and begin our new life together. I stood there, glowing with the remnants of my service and the promise of new life in my belly, holding my rosary as a shield. But when the door opened, there was no light in Mark's eyes, only a layer of filth and judgment that made my stomach turn. He wouldn't even let me across the threshold, treating me like a stranger who had committed some unspeakable crime instead of a wife returning from a pilgrimage. He looked at my pregnancy with such visceral disgust that I felt a physical pain in my chest, realizing that his heart had turned to stone while mine had been breaking for others. The words that came out of his mouth were so sharp and devoid of humanity that they felt like physical blows to my spirit. He told me to go back to the grave I dug, as if my 3 years of suffering were something shameful rather than a testament to my character. I stood on the porch, praying fervently for his hardened heart, wondering how a man could be so spiritually blind that he would reject a woman for being too kind. It is truly a tragedy when a person's ego is so large that they cannot recognize a miracle standing right in front of them. I left that porch feeling more like a martyr than ever, walking away with the dignity of a woman who has fulfilled her divine purpose. Main story comments. Anonymous user 1 says, so you sacrificed your marriage by moving in with your ex for 3 years and having his baby, and you're shocked. Mark didn't throw a parade? That wasn't a mission of mercy. It was a 3-year sleepover at your husband's expense. Up's reply, it is clear your soul is far too small to grasp the concept of divine sacrifice. I gave up everything to comfort a dying man while you sit behind a screen and judge what you cannot understand. Anonymous user 2 says, I'm curious about the biology of this miracle. Was Julian really so terminal that he couldn't walk, but still healthy enough to conceive a child in the middle of his transition? The timeline isn't nothing. Ops reply, love finds a way to blossom even in the deepest valley of shadows. And if you choose to focus on the technicalities of the flesh instead of the beauty of the spirit, I truly pity your lack of faith. Update 1. It's been 3 days since my last update, and I am currently forced to stay on a friend's sofa because Mark has chosen to escalate his cruelty by blocking all my credit cards. It's truly frightening how quickly a man can transform into a vengeful monster the moment his fragile pride is slightly bruised by a woman's higher calling. I spent hours crafting a long, heartfelt message to him, explaining that little Leo is an innocent soul who deserves the protection of a father figure. By rejecting me now, he isn't just hurting me. He is essentially spitting on a dying man's last wish for his caregiver to be looked after. Mark didn't even have the decency to reply with words proving that he has completely abandoned any semblance of emotional intelligence. Instead of a response, he sent me a single chilling photo of a black trash bag sitting on the rain-slicked sidewalk in front of our old house. Inside that bag were my prayer books, my maternity clothes, and the few personal items I hadn't taken with me when I left to serve Julian. I had to drive over there in a torrential downpour to retrieve my belongings before they were ruined by the elements or stolen by passers-by. As I hauled those heavy, wet bags into my car, I felt like a saint being pelted with stones by a mob of the unrighteous. The physical weight of the wet fabric was nothing compared to the spiritual weight of realizing my husband had truly lost his way. My friend, whose sofa I am currently occupying, keeps telling me that I need to be realistic about the situation, but she doesn't understand the depth of my faith. She suggests I look for a job or a lawyer, but I know that Mark is simply going through a period of intense spiritual testing. He is lashing out because he is overwhelmed by the purity of my actions and doesn't know how to process his own feelings of inadequacy. I refuse to give up on him because I know there is a good man, but buried deep beneath all that layers of bitter resentment and ego. My role now is to be the light that guides him out of his self-imposed darkness, no matter how much he tries to push me away. I've decided that the only way to break through his hardened exterior is to present him with the undeniable truth of the situation. Tomorrow, I am going to show up at his office with a certified copy of Julian's death certificate and the medical records from the hospice care. He needs to see the why behind my actions and understand the sheer amount of suffering I witnessed and alleviated during those 3 years. Perhaps when he sees the cold, hard facts of Julian's demise, he will finally find the path to his own redemption and ask for my forgiveness. I am prepared to be patient, for I know that the road to enlightenment is often paved with the misunderstandings of the worldly minded. Update 1 comments. Anonymous user 1 says going to his office with a death certificate? That's not building a bridge. That's literal workplace harassment and stalking. Mark is clearly done, and you're just trying to force your way back into a life you abandoned. Ops reply, you call it stalking, but I call it an intervention to save a man's soul from the terminal bitterness that is currently consuming him from the inside out. Anonymous user 2 says, a saint being pelted with stones? Girl, you are the villain in a low-budget soap opera who thinks she's the lead. You left your husband for years and came back pregnant. Of course your clothes are in a trash bag. Ops reply, I will pray for your heart, for you truly know not what you tweeted. Must be exhausting to live with so much cynicism toward the acts of the truly devoted. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and I'm still reeling from the absolute nightmare that was my visit to Mark's office. I arrived there with my documents in hand, prepared to offer him a path to peace, but he didn't even give me the chance to explain the beautiful symbolism of Leo's middle name. Before I could even open my mouth, Mark had security escort me out of the building as if I were a common criminal or a disgruntled employee. He actually shouted in front of all his colleagues that he doesn't care about the theology of my infidelity, which was a direct insult to the holy work I performed. Infidelity is such a base, vulgar word for what was clearly a corporal work of mercy performed under the most dire of circumstances. Since Mark has clearly surrounded himself with a wall of professional and personal guards, I realized I needed to reach out to someone whose heart might be more porous to the truth. I contacted his mother, a woman I always thought possessed a modicum of Christian charity, and sent her a beautiful sonogram of the baby. I even took the time to frame it with a carefully chosen verse about the importance of charity and the welcoming of the little ones. I truly believe that a grandmother's natural instincts would override the toxic narrative Mark has been feeding the family about my betrayal. I waited by the phone for days, expecting a call filled with tears and a longing to meet the new life I have brought into the world. She did eventually call me, but it was far from the reconciliation I had envisioned in my prayers. Instead of offering support, she told me that I was sick and that I needed to leave her son alone before he was forced to file a formal restraining order against me. It was devastating to realize that Mark's ego has managed to poison his entire family tree, turning even his own mother against the concept of grace. They have all chosen to see the scandal instead of the sacrifice, which only proves how much the world fears a woman who follows her own moral compass. It is a lonely path I walk, but I have always known that the most righteous among us are often the most misunderstood by their own kin. Despite this rejection, I refuse to let Mark's darkness win, so I've decided to take a more formal approach to our reconciliation. I am using the small life insurance policy Julian left behind for the baby to hire a professional mediator to facilitate a meeting between us. I want to make it very clear to everyone that I don't want Mark's money or his assets. I simply want him to acknowledge that I am a fundamentally good person. I'm willing to go through any legal or social channel necessary to force him to look into my eyes and see the light that I carry. I will not allow my reputation to be tarnished by his inability to grasp the concept of unconditional mercy. Update 2 comments. Anonymous user 1 says sending a sonogram of your ex's baby to your mother-in-law with a Bible verse is the peak of manipulative, unhinged behavior. You're not building bridges. You're lighting them on fire and wondering why it's getting hot. Ops reply, I'm simply trying to restore the family bonds that Mark's pride has shattered. If truth is uncomfortable for the worldly, that is a reflection on them, not on me. Anonymous user 2 says a mediator is for negotiating a divorce, not for a forced validation session to make your ex-husband tell you you're a saint. You're literally paying someone to try and brainwash him into ignoring your cheating. Ops reply, the law must eventually recognize that moral intent carries more weight than mere technicalities. And I will defend my character until the very end. Update 3. It's been 2 months since my last update, and I feel as though the very foundations of my world have collapsed into a heap of dust and betrayal. I walked into the mediation session with such hope, even bringing Julian's private medical journals to use as evidence of the grueling nurse duties I had performed. I wanted the mediator and the world to see the depth of my service, to understand the raw, ugly reality of the noble mission I had undertaken. I thought that by exposing the gore and the grief, I would finally be vindicated as the selfless martyr I have always known myself to be. But Mark wasn't there to listen to my testimony. He was there with a lawyer who had been quietly digging a pit for me to fall into. During the session, they produced a stack of photographs and videos that felt like a series of physical daggers to my heart. They weren't from the hospice or the sick room. They were private albums Julian had kept on a hidden social media account that I didn't even know existed. There were photos of us at loud, expensive parties, laughing with drinks in our hands, and shots from a bucket list beach vacation in Hawaii where I looked perfectly happy and healthy. There was even a video of our gender reveal party, complete with blue confetti and cheers, all while Mark was back home working 2 jobs to pay the mortgage on the house I had abandoned. The sacrificial service I had bragged about for months was suddenly framed as nothing more than a 3-year, long-term honeymoon funded by my husband's ignorance. The mediator, a woman I thought would have some professional empathy, looked at me with a level of pure, unadulterated disgust that made my skin crawl. I tried to explain that the vacation was necessary for Julian's lungs and that the parties were a way to keep his spirits high during his final days, but no one was listening. The boomerang of my own narrative hit me so hard I could barely breathe. The more I had tried to prove how dedicated I was to Julian, the more I provided the exact evidence they needed to show I was living a double life. Now my reputation as a woman of faith and devotion is in absolute tatters, and Mark is using my own holy testimonies against me in court. He is suing for a fault-based divorce that will leave me with absolutely nothing, claiming that my mercy was just a calculated cover for a years-long affair. It is incredibly cruel how the legal system can take a beautiful act of human connection and twist it into something so ugly and transactional. I am left standing in the ruins of my own light, watching as the man I tried to save from his own bitterness uses my greatest sacrifices to destroy my future. The secular world is a cold, heartless place for someone who chooses to live by the laws of the spirit rather than the laws of men. Update 3 comments. Anonymous user 1 says, the nurse is nursing a Mai Tai on the beach. You really had us in the first half with the bedpans and the Bible, but Hawaii? That's some next level mercy, Ops. Ops replied Julian desperately needed the sea air for his failing lungs, and I was merely the vessel that provided him with one last moment of joy before the end. Anonymous user 2 says at this point, you need to stop talking and get a real lawyer before you lose the clothes off your back. You've handed Mark everything he needs to ruin you on a silver platter. Ops reply it is a tragedy that our society has created a legal system so secular and cruel that it cannot distinguish between a vacation and a final act of grace. Update 4. It's been 6 months since the final decree was signed, and I find myself living in a tiny cramped studio apartment that barely has enough room for a crib. Leo is 5 months old now, and every time I look into his eyes, I see the face of the man who unwittingly helped me dismantle the comfortable life I once took for granted. Mark has already moved on, apparently engaged to some woman who doesn't have a past, as if being untested and unremarkable were some kind of supreme virtue. I still wear my cross every single day, a reminder that I am the one who stayed true to the path of sacrifice even when it led me into the wilderness. I've tried to join a new church, but even in the house of God the air is thick with the poison of gossip and judgment. People whisper when I walk by with the stroller, their eyes darting to my ringless finger and then back to their hymnals, as if they are the ones qualified to judge the weight of my soul. Word travels fast in these circles, and it seems Mark's version of the scandal has reached every corner of the community before I could even share my truth. It is a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that those who claim to follow a message of forgiveness are the quickest to cast stones at a woman who lived it. Sometimes when the walls of this studio feel like they're closing in, I take Leo to the park and sit on a bench near the road where I know Mark's car often passes. I wait there for hours, hoping that he might catch a glimpse of me with the baby and finally experience the epiphany that has eluded him for so long. I want him to see the depth of the grace he rejected and realize that by casting me out, he lost the only person who was ever truly willing to suffer for his sake. But he never looks my way. His car just speeds past, a blur of silver and indifference that leaves me sitting in the dust of his new shallow life. I did what was right, and deep in my heart I know that my actions were dictated by a higher morality than the one this world operates on. If the people around me choose to call my mercy a betrayal, then it is simply because the world is not yet ready for a woman of my conviction. I'm the only one who truly knows the full extent of what I endured and what I gave up for the sake of 2 men who were ultimately unworthy of my light. I will continue to carry my head high, a lone martyr in a world of small-minded cowards, forever being the only one who truly knows how much I suffered for everyone's sake.